Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to my thesis defense. I'm Steven. My option is in energy management and policy. I earned my bachelor degree in 2018 with major in energy engineering. My advisor is Dr. Seth Blumsack. So today, my topic is the impact of the blackout cost recovery on stock behaviors among utility companies. Before I start, please allow me to appreciate Dr. Blumsack. He's always been very patient to me and guiding me through my research project. Also, I want to appreciate Dr. Lei and Dr. Webster for being my committee members. I would like also to appreciate my parents for supporting me at Penn State. And thanks to everybody for coming here today. Here is a brief outline of my topic today. So in my research, I will cover introduction, data, method, result, and the conclusion. The first chapter is the introduction. In this chapter, I will cover 5 parts. In first part, I will go through the motivations, and then the literature reviews, and then I will define research questions, and make some hypotheses, and talks about the contributions. So does anybody know what's the biggest news of the electric industry in this year? Well, I would say the bankruptcy of the PG&E. As nature disasters are being more intense and frequent under the effect of the climate change, people dies and huge economic loss occurred. In electric industry, after nature disasters, there will be blackout and people will live without electricity. As policymakers, we may think about 2 questions. First, we may need to review the recovery mechanism of the electric utilities after the nature disasters. And the second one is that we may also consider how much we should issue to utility sector after nature disasters. So my research is making connections between nature disasters and the power industry. To analyze this topic, I studied previous literatures on 4 topics. The first one is the nature disasters, and the second one is the energy industry. And I also studied some literatures on stock market and the event study method. Previous literatures shows that scientists and economists have already applied the event study method into energy industry. However, there's no article clearly showed the relationship between hurricanes and the utility firms. In other words, how does the utility firms recover from the blackout after hurricanes? And how does the hurricanes affected the stock market of the utility firms? This is what I studied on. So I make 2 research questions here. The first one is, how does the blackout recovery mechanism affected the stock market? And the second one is, who actually paid for the large blackouts? Towards my research question, I listed 4 hypotheses and 1 assumptions based on the efficient market hypothesis. Well, the efficient market hypothesis describes the relationship between informations and the stock market, which is that any pieces of the informations will be fully reflected on the stock market. Based on this hypothesis, my first hypothesis is that longer blackouts will yield larger market loss. And my second hypothesis is that there will be less impact of the stock on the firms without blackouts. And my third hypothesis is that hurricane forecasts will change investors' behaviors. And my last hypothesis is that investors will incorporate blackout cost recovery into their stock valuation. I also defined the large-scale blackout is that at least 100,000 customers were affected in a single blackout event. In my research, I used the financial data to decompose blackout cost recovery to identify how much paid by shareholders. And I also used stock data to evaluate whether investors incorporate blackout cost into their stock valuations. In Chapter 2, I will go through my data selection. So I construct my dataset from 3 sources. The first one is that I gathered blackout data from table OE417 from Department of Energy in period of 2002 to 2012. And I also get the historical stock data from CRSP of the market index and the utility sector. Accompanied with this, I also gathered the financial annual report of the companies who reported blackouts to track their recovery mechanism after the blackouts. So there are basically 57 large blackouts in my dataset. As shown in this map, we can see that most of the blackouts were occurred in the Gulf of Mexico coastline area. As we can see here, Florida, Texas, and Louisiana were mainly affected states. On the pie chart on the right, it shows which firms were involved in those 57 events. In third chapter, I will cover the method that I'm conducting into my research. The first part, I will talk about the recovery mechanism after the blackout. And then I will discuss how I applied the event study method and the CAPM model into my research. And I will also define nadir and rate of change. So typically, after a large blackout, huge amount of the cash will be spent towards the restoration. And 3 entities will pay for this restoration. They are customers, shareholders, and third parties. Utilities will charge customers by constructing storm reserve before the hurricanes. And after the hurricanes, they will also charge customers by earning additional revenue from the rate increasing cases. They will also charge shareholders by paying them lower dividends. After the blackouts, utility may also want to claim the insurance and apply the government fundings. We call this part is third-party payment. One thing I need to mention here is that some utilities may prefer to borrow money from other organizations, but later on, they will pay back this liability through their revenues. So we also consider this part is paid by customers. After we studied the recovery mechanism, we will analyze how does this affected the stock market. In order to study the stock market behaviors, I used the event study method. The basic idea of the event study method is computing the abnormal returns. Well, the abnormal return is defined as the difference between actual return and the expected returns. After we have the abnormal returns, we are able to construct cumulative abnormal return of a single firm in time period t, as equation 3 shows here. For a large portfolio including several firms, I also developed the average cumulative abnormal return as shown in equation 4. So, if we want to have the expected return, I used the capital asset pricing model here, which is also called CAPM. Well, the CAPM model describes the relationship between systematic risk and expected return, as shown in equation 5. By rearranging this equation, we can get the ordinary least square regression, as shown in equation 6, which describes the relationship between daily return of a single stock and the market index. In order to find out the daily return, I use two formulas. For a single stock, the daily return can be calculated by using the price difference of 2 days over the price of the first day. For a portfolio including several firms, the daily return can be calculated by summing the market cap times the daily returns of each firm over the total market cap of the portfolio. Well, the market cap can be calculated by using the price of the stock times the outstanding shares. After that, we can obtain the cumulative abnormal returns and get a plot like this figure shows. In this figure, I defined nadir is the minimum point of the cumulative abnormal return, while rate of change is a daily changing rate from its initial position to its nadir. So I will use the event study method to test the first 3 hypotheses, and I will matching the event study method with the recovery mechanism to test the last hypothesis. In next chapter, I will cover my result. So I will go through 4 parts in my result. The first part is the blackout firms and the utility sector. In the second part, I will discuss the regional effects. In the third part, I will go through the forecast impact. While in the last part, I will talk about the cost recovery allocation. So the first hypothesis I want to test is that longer blackouts will yield larger market loss of the stock. In order to test this model, I used the linear regression model, and I controlled the robustness of this model. In this model, my independent variable is the blackout length, and my dependent variable is nadirs after the blackout. From the linear regression, it suggests that blackout length is a significantly affected nadirs of the stock after blackout. So, we can conclude that longer blackouts will yield larger market index, larger market loss. The next hypothesis I want to test is that there will be less impact of the firms without blackouts. By testing this hypothesis, I compared 2 portfolios including the blackout firms and the utility sector. As shown in this figure, the y-axis is the average cumulative abnormal returns, while the x-axis is the trading days after the blackout. And the blue line is stand for the blackout firms, while the green line is stand for the utility sector. And the red line is the market index. As we can see from this figure here, it looks like both blackout firms and the whole utility sector are behaving same patterns after the blackout. So it probably indicates that this hypothesis is not true. To be more in detail, I tested the firms without blackout in the hurricane state as a portfolio, which is defined as neighbor firms here. And it is the gray line in the figure on the figure. So I compared the stock of those two portfolios with market index. So this figure tells us three things. The first thing is that for those firms, even they didn't report blackout, they were facing decline as well after the blackout occurred. The second thing is that they were having same nadirs and same rate of change as blackout firms after the blackouts. And the third thing is that for those firms did not report blackout, their stock bounced faster compared to the blackout firms. So we can conclude that there will be same impact of the firms without blackouts after hurricanes. The next hypothesis I want to test is that investors will incorporate hurricane forecasts into their stock valuations. To test this hypothesis, I also compared two portfolios' average cumulative abnormal returns. They are blackout firms and unaffected firms. As shown in this figure here, in this scenario, I defined day 0 is 1 week ahead hurricane forecast, and day 5 is a blackout date. I also calculated the rate of change after the 5 days after the hurricane forecast and 15 days after the blackouts. From the table on the left, we can see that the rate of change after blackouts is much larger compared to the rate of change after the hurricane forecast in its magnitude, which indicates that investors will not incorporate hurricane forecasts into their stock valuations. So the last hypothesis I tested is that investors incorporate blackout cost recovery into their stock valuations. To test this hypothesis, I constructed a case study and using the financial evidence from Entergy Corporation and Clico Power. The reason why I chose Entergy and Clico Power is that both of them were having service in same area, and they were all affected in Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Gustav, and Hurricane Isaac in 2005, 2008, and 2012. But the stock behavior were exactly different of those two firms, which is very interesting, right? So let's see the stock of Entergy first. This figure shows the stock behavior after hurricanes in those 3 hurricane years. As we can see here, in both 2005 and 2008, Entergy were faced over 20% decline in its market loss after hurricanes. But in 2008, it only took 30 days after the blackouts. As I found the evidence from their financial report, it looks like that investors are in higher risk to pay the larger amount to its restorations in 2008. That's the reason why the rate of change in 2008 was larger in its magnitude compared to 2005. However, in October of 2008, Entergy announced that they will claim insurance and apply the government fundings in total amount of over 1,200 million US dollars, which indicates that shareholders would only need to pay about 100 million US dollars, which is a little portion of its total restoration cost. That's the reason why their stock bouncing at that point. After we see Entergy, we will see the Clinical Powers. The stock behavior of Clinical Powers were extremely different from Entergy because the Clinical Powers didn't report market loss after the hurricanes and after their blackouts. That's because two reasons. The first one is that unlike Entergy, Clinical Power was not spend that much money on their restorations since their firm is not as large as Entergy. The second reason is that almost all of their restoration cost was covered by their money reserve and their insurance, which indicates that shareholders basically paid nothing towards the restoration cost, as shown in this table here. Now, at this point, it looks like investors do incorporate the hurricane cost recovery into their stock valuations. Well, I will finish my presentation with a short conclusion. So in this research, I have four findings. The first one is that the stock price of most utility firms and the utility sector will face the decline immediately after the blackouts caused by hurricanes, and the larger blackouts will yield larger market loss. My second conclusion is that hurricanes will have state-level contagion effect, no matter the firm reported blackout or not. But for those firms who didn't report blackout, their stock will rebound much more faster compared to the blackout firms. My third conclusion is that investors will not incorporate the hurricane forecast into their stock valuations, but they will incorporate the recovery mechanism of the utilities into their stock valuations. Now, I hope you still remember my hypothesis. From my result, it looks like I successfully found the evidence to support my first and my fourth hypothesis, but I didn't find the evidence for my second and my third hypothesis. This is my reference page. Thanks for listening and watching.